Welcome to Strategy Battle Gamers to another GBHL YouTube channel video. You're here with your host GBHL James, and today I'm going to be supplying you another Hobbit Hobby Tip. Now, a very common question that I get asked when people are watching our videos is, how do I base my models? Which I find very flattering because the way that I base them is quite a basic technique. It took me a little while to sort out and figure out and master. I'm going to share that with you today so you guys can base your models just like I do. So here is an example of a model that I based using my basing technique. So as you can see here, it's been done on Arathorn. Now it doesn't matter whether you do this on an infantry base, a cavalry base, and it even scales up nicely to a big monster base like this. So I'm going to start things off for you now. So first up, you're going to need a little bit of PVA glue and you're going to need some water. Just mix them together. Make sure you use a brush that you don't like as much, that you don't tend to paint with. That's very, very important. Don't use a brush that you value. So the first step is just to mix up a little bit of the PVA glue that we have here and just pop it on top. You don't need too much when you're just doing one like I am. Just popping it on top there. And the reason we're thinning this down is because we just want a nice spread. We don't want it to be too gloopy. Probably mixed a bit too much there for the one model that I'm going to be demoing with today. And you are lucky enough to see me demoing with 3 Hunters Aragorn today. So I'm going to give this a good mixture just so that it's not particularly gloopy in one area, so the consistency is equal throughout. And then I'm just going to take some of it off the brush there. So usually when I do this, I will do this before I prime the model so that the whole thing can be sprayed black, including the sand that I use. But on this occasion, this model has already come primed. So as you can see here, I'm just giving a nice gentle dabbling, just trying to make sure that I cover all the edges, because what will happen, because there is the water in there, you'll find that the PVA glue will just recede from the edges slightly, and we don't necessarily want that too much, but nor do we want to cover those edges. I just want to make sure that everything is covered. We've got a reasonably generous amount, not too much, but just enough for our sand that we're going to be using to take hold to the base. It doesn't matter too much if you catch some parts of the model that you don't intend. Of course, you can always come back, just give them a quick wipe when you've finished, which is what I intend to do. So that's most of it covered. Of course, we've got a little bit of receding there, so we'll just cover that up again and give it a good spread, and there we go. Simple as that. So next up, we have to dip this guy in the sand pit. So as you can see here, the sand that I like to use is like a gravelly kind of sand. It's not completely fine, and that's really important for the texture of the base. I find that if the sand is a bit too fine there and a bit too even, then it can take away some of the realism from the base of the model. And what you actually want is a little bit of unevenness almost. So I'm just going to spin this guy around in here, try and get as much on there as possible. And what I tend to do, if I can, is I will then just leave the model in there and allow the PVA to dry. So once his base has dried, then you need to pull him out of the sand to give him a good shake off. As you can see, I've actually managed to paint 3 Hunters Aragorn, or mostly just got to finish off his face and hands while I've been waiting for that base to dry. So yeah, we want to put a bit of paint onto that base, and I like to go for a bit of Rhinox hide. So it's a good idea to thin down the paint for this, because the sand will tend to absorb it up. You can see here, me just plopping it on, you can see the sand absorbing a lot of the brown paint there. And what I'll do is I'll come back when we're going on to the next layer. And there we go. So once we've got the Rhinox hide nicely on the base, we're going to wait for that to dry. And once it's dried, we're going to be pulling out Mournfang Brown. And we're going to use the Mournfang Brown to do the first lot of dry brushing. So remember, when dry brushing, you don't need to add water to the paint. You just want to get about half a brush full of paint in there. Give it a good scrape off. And then you want to keep on dabbing it on the paper towel or tissue or whatever you're using, as I'm doing here, until there's not a lot left. You can check that by just popping it along the back of your hand until you don't feel any wetness at all. And then once we've done that, we're going to go straight into the dry brushing, and dry brushing just nice and light, back and forwards across the base, just catching any of the raised areas as we go. So now that we've picked out some of the raised areas with the lighter brown, while I've got it out, I'm actually going to use this brown to paint around the rim. Now you don't have to do this, but I like to do it. I just think it makes the models stand out that little bit more, look a touch more natural. And I like to do that with Mornfan Brown. So I'm going to do that now before we start picking out the rocks and applying the final dry brush. So that's the rim painted there. I'm just going to do the single coat for now, and that's because if we just did both our coats now and then applied the lighter dry brush later on, what's going to happen is we're going to end up with a bit of a sort of chalky or sharpsy bone sort of effect going around the rim, which you want to avoid. So now we're going to start picking out, and this is the reason why I use slightly gravelly sand. I'm going to start picking out some of the bigger rocks, or the bigger gravels of sand, which are going to become the rocks on the base. And for that, I'm going to be using Dawnstone. So you can see here all I'm doing is picking out some of these rocks here, just very, very lightly applying the paint. Don't have to get full coverage, because it's just the effect of the rocky ground that we're trying to create, and it's just going to make the model stand out that little bit more. So if I'm going to do this all the way around the base. Sometimes you might see some little flecks. It's definitely worth sort of picking up the small ones that are near each other. That creates a really nice effect on the ground. I'm going to come back when I'm finished. And here's how it looks after you've got all the little flecks on the base. So now that bit's done, we go on to our final dry brush, where we bring in the sharpsy bone layer. For the dry brush, remember, we don't need to water down the paint, use any medium or anything, and we're going to use the tissue over there just to make sure we get any remnant paint off, because it's a very, very light dry brush. So I'll come back when I've finished that. And there it is after the final sharpsy bone highlight. So it's not all finished there. Once I've done that, I like to try and apply my static grass. So I'm going to show you how to do that now. All you need to do your flocking is exactly the same as when you put your sand on. Got me PVA glue there, just a little dish with a tiny, tiny bit of water in, that brush that I don't really like very much, and then also that Javis Countryside Scenics flock. So I like this one because it seems to have a little bit more realism to it. And I actually bought this from Mark Boyland of the Chester Model Railway Centre, so worth getting in touch with him if you want to get hold of that. So we're going to mix up the glue, and we're going to put a couple of little light dabbles onto the base there, and then we're going to gently squeeze and rub some of the flock between our fingers and try and get it onto the little spots where we want the grass. So I'm going to go into doing that now. And there it is after applying the flock. So quite tough to get on there. I tend to put little dabbles in between where some of the rocks are for it to cling to, just so that you're not covering the whole thing, and it just gives it that extra kind of dimension of realism. Now I would recommend trying to use maybe some little tweezers or something just to clump this on. Just rub it in your fingers first so it gets a bit static, and then just clump it on. And be very, very generous and let it just settle there for a little while before you blow it off like I have here. Now, one last thing that I like to do before I do my final paint of the rim, and that is put some tufts on. Now, I only really do these for bigger model bases or for models which are particularly nice, like this one here, and I'll show you those now. So these are my self-adhesive tufts. Now, some people buy these from Games Workshop or from Army Painter or their local hobby store. I know that Element Games do a huge range of different ones, but they are quite expensive, I have to say. I actually picked up these, and I can't remember how many there were. There might have been about 48 for less than a £5 on eBay. It's definitely worth checking out there. There's the website. Now these are self-adhesive, so you pick a couple off and put them on the base. I would say for an infantry base, or like this one here, you're probably only going to get one on, but I'm going to do that now. So you literally just pick them off like so, and it's got its own sticky little bottom here, and I'm just going to place this just nice and close up against Aragorn there. Don't be afraid to sort of press it down to make sure that it sticks, and then make sure that you've got all the grass sticking up, and that really does add a degree of realism. So I'm going to finish off with a second coat on the rim, and I'll show you the final product. and that's the finished product. So there you go, that's it with its full rim. So it's a good mixture there of flock, sand, some dry brushing, some rimming, and also using the tufts as well. I hope you guys enjoyed this week's Hobbit Hobby Tip. So make sure as always that you comment, like, share and subscribe. Support your Hobbit hobby, and happy strategy battle gaming.